Well, good day, my friends. Welcome to Northfield, Minnesota. Northfield is probably most known historically for being the last bank robbery of the James gang. Frank James, Jesse James. It was the James Younger gang tried to do a heist here, and one heroic cashier for the bank managed to thwart them. We're going to tell you their story today. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all begins right now. Our story today takes place in 1876. And back then, instead of seeing all of these cars on sidewalks, you would have seen wooden boardwalks and horses up and down the street. This is really an amazing story, not because of, the Jesse James lore that most people would be immediately interested, but this was in a time where banks were not backed financially, they were not insured. So if the bank was robbed, they lost what they had. And this bank had $15,000 at the time, and that was all the town's money. So we have a heroic act by one cashier that really should be the story that people come out to see. You can take a tour right here at the museum. Everything inside is original except for the teller's cage. But the tables, the clocks, everything else, even the ledger with J.S. Allen's signature being the last one in there is on display.
September 7th, 1876. A lot of this looked this way at that time. This building's original. There was a square there. It was called Mill Square at the time. The Dampier Hotel is the building across the corner with the turret. That becomes relevant to our story as well. So it was a very hot day in 1876 on September 7th, about 2 in the afternoon. People are just going about their business in town, if you will. There's 3 people in Northfield who we talk about on this tour. Henry Wheeler would have been a young man. He was a medical student. His dad owned, and behind the tree, there would have been a drugstore. It was obviously not that building, because that building was built in 1886, about 10 years later, but it would have been a building there. He was sitting in front of his dad's drugstore, kind of just talking to people, killing time that afternoon. There were 2 hardware store owners. There would have been 2 hardware stores facing, in this building or adjacent to this building, facing the square. J.S. Manning owned one of them. No, excuse me, J.S. Allen. J.S. Allen was the last customer in the bank before the raid. And A.R. Manning was the other hardware store owner. So the bank, as I just told those people there were 8 bank robbers. The first 3 to come across the Iron Bridge into Mill Square were Frank James, Bob Younger, and Charlie Pitts. They come in on their horses, hook up their horses here in front of the building, and there would have been some crates and some barrels here, and they kind of lurk underneath the staircase. Now that would have been an open staircase at the time. The next into the square are Jesse James, Jim Younger, and Bill Chadwell. Their job is to more or less just kind of mill around the square to protect this escape route, because the original intended escape route was back across the Iron Bridge to the west. The last 2 into town were Cole Younger and Clell Miller. They come along on the other side of this building down the block and enter from the south. Now all 8 of these guys are wearing dusters, and dusters are kind of those long white coats that you always see Jesse James gang portrayed in. That would have been an acceptable attire at the time, but not a usual attire at the time. It was mostly worn by cattle buyers.
Would have drawn attention,
people,
possibly.
Right, that rode. So it causes some suspicion. So as Clell and Cole come around the corner at this point, that's the signal for these guys to go into the bank. That's how they do it. J.S. Allen, as I said, is the last customer in the bank. He comes out of the bank and he is standing just about here having a conversation with a friend. These guys go into the bank. Now, both doors of the bank are open that day because it's hot and you want the breeze to go in. So the front door and the back door into the alley, both of them are open. They go into the bank, they leave the bank door open. Clell Miller makes the critical mistake of the day because he gets down off his horse, and he goes and he closes the door. So Henry Wheeler, who's over there, is thinking, why did 3 men in white dusters just go into the bank? And then somebody who apparently was unrelated, also wearing a duster, comes in, gets down off his horse, and goes and closes the door.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Not likely.
J.S. Allen is also suspicious of this activity, so he starts walking back towards the bank, and he approaches Clell Miller. And Clell Miller pulls out his gun and says, get off the street. J.S. Allen, at this point, figures out what's going on and calls out, hey boys, grab your guns, they're robbing the bank. And the entire town is alerted. Meanwhile, Henry Wheeler's also figured it out. He's running down the street, yelling, robbery, robbery, to alert the people. Henry Wheeler runs down and into the hotel, which is the Dampier Hotel at the time. The proprietor of the hotel was a Civil War vet, so he knows that he has a rifle. So he gets the rifle, he gets the ammunition, he goes up to the 2nd story, and he positions himself in the window, 3rd window in from the, I guess, left, so 3rd window in. A.R. Manning is over here in his hardware store. He sells guns. So he grabs one of his guns, the rifle, and positions himself underneath the staircase hill. So Cole and Clell get off their horses, and they're realizing they've been figured out. They've been had. They're standing here behind Bob's horse. Henry Manning starts taking a shot at him. They see him. They crouch down. He shoots the horse. Well, regrets this because this is a really nice horse. This is like the Lamborghini of horses at the time. But he realizes that if he shoots the horse, he's going to help impede their escape. They get back on their horses. They fire off a couple shots to alert the guys that are over here in the square to come join them, and they start riding up and down the street trying to intimidate the various city people, and they get in the gunfight. Henry Wheeler, who's up in the window, takes out his gun, he fires, and he shoots, and he hits Clell Miller in the shoulder. It hits Clell's subclavian artery. He falls off his horse, he bleeds out, he's dead. A.R. Manning, who's positioned himself over here, takes an aim at Bill Chadwell, who's riding up and down the street trying to intimidate the visitors. He hits him in the heart. He also falls off and is dead in the street. So now we have 2 dead bank robbers and a dead horse. And Cole is saying to himself, this is not going well, we gotta call it. So he rides by the bank a couple times and implores the bank robbers who are in there to come out and join him. They eventually do, and they jump on their horses, they start to leave town, and Bob over here, who's gotten in a duel with A.R. Manning, Henry Wheeler takes a shot at him and hits him in the elbow and shatters his elbow. He doesn't have a horse, he's shot in the elbow, he calls out his brother Cole, comes back down the street, picks him up. So there's 2 bank robbers on one horse, and they start to head south of town. So now we're going to say, meanwhile, back in the bank, and we'll go into the bank and I'll take the story from there.
So these are all the gang members from that day.
And trains for about 10 years at this point. And they're infamous. Everybody knows who they are, but they mostly had committed all of their crimes down in kind of the Missouri, Kentucky, South area. This is the first one they've ever come north into Minnesota. So I'm going to go back behind the teller's page, and if you don't mind staying there, I'll tell you the rest of the story here. So like as I said,
There's the front doors.
Back in the bank. So this is the First National Bank. This is actually the actual floor that would have been in the bank at the time in 1876. Most of the objects you see in here today are either original to the space or were from the time period. So that clock is the original clock. It's set to 2 o'clock on the day of the raid. That is the time the raid took place. This bank vault, there's a safe inside, and then there's a vault surrounding it. The table's the actual table, like I said, most of the objects. The only thing that's a recreation, it's exact recreation, is this teller's cage.
Okay.
This is the actual ledger, and J.S. Allen is the last customer on that day. Obviously, there's other things that come after the day because the bank kept on operating. The First National Bank in Northfield was just sold a few years ago to a different bank, Merchants Bank, but it is on the corner over there, so it did move locations, but it's still operational to this day. So there's $15,000 in the bank that day. That $15,000 is equivalent to about $250,000 now, but that's how much was in the bank, and that was in the vault. The 3 bank robbers come in. There's 3 people working in the bank that day. There's a clerk, Frank Wilcox. There's a teller, Alonzo Bunker. Both these guys are only in their late 20s. And then there's an acting cashier, Joseph Lee Haywood. Bob Younger's the first one in. They all jump over this cage in dramatic fashion and tell the clerk and the teller, Frank and Alonzo Bunker, to get down on their knees with their hands up. You know, typical what we expect. Bob Younger's job is to guard them with his gun and then to start going through the drawers to see if there's any money. Frank James wants to know who's the cashier because the cashier is the only one who would be able to open the safe. He approaches Joseph Lee Haywood because he's the oldest. He asks Joseph Lee Haywood, "Are you the cashier?" Joseph Lee Haywood denies being the cashier. It's the first of 4 times Joseph Lee Haywood's going to lie to these robbers or try and thwart the bank robbery. So they turn to the other 2. Are you the cashier? Are you the cashier? Everyone's denying it. Charlie Pitts is getting ticked off. Charlie Pitts, they aren't used to a lot of resistance. They're like, you know, what are these guys doing? So he starts to enter the vault. And Joseph Lee Haywood's like, all right, I'm going to slam the door. I'm going to slam him in there. Charlie throws out his arm. His arm closes on the door. Now he's really angry. He goes back to Joseph Lee Haywood and he says, open, you know, the darn safe. And Joseph Lee Haywood lies for a 3rd time and he says, oh, I can't open the safe. It's on a time lock and it's locked right now. Well, a time lock safe was a relatively new invention at the time. The bank robbers were familiar with it. But had they thought it through, it wouldn't have been locked during the day. You lock them at night because that's when most robberies took place because obviously people were making deposits and taking money out.
Right.
And it was in fact open. So Joseph Lee Haywood is just lying to them constantly to try and thwart this robbery while Charlie Pitts now is ticked. So he goes up, he swings his gun in his face, and in an attempt to call for help or alert the people outside, Joseph Lee Haywood starts shouting, murder, murder! Well, we all know that they knew what was going on outside because all heck was breaking loose. Well, Charlie Pitts gets really angry with him and clocks him over the head and knocks him out. Joseph Lee Haywood falls to the ground. Charlie starts dragging Joseph Lee Haywood into the bank and shoots the gun over his head, and that bullet lodges in the wall. He does this to kind of startle him, to wake him up. But what happens is Bob Younger, who's over here keeping these guys and going through all the doors with Frank, is startled, and he turns to see who was shot, you know, who's been shot, and Alonzo Bunker gets up and uses it to escape, and he goes out the back door. Charlie Pitts follows him. Charlie Pitts starts shooting at him. Charlie misses him the first time, but then hits him in the alley in the shoulder. Alonzo Bunker is able to run to a doctor. The bullet's removed. He survives. But meanwhile, Wilcox and Haywood are left in here. Cole is riding up and down the street saying, get out of the bank, get out of the bank, get out of the bank. You know, we're failing. So Bob grabs a burlap sack, kind of like this one, with all the money they got out of the bank that day, which was $27.60. Now, for whatever reason, there was $3,000 in one of these teller drawers. They didn't open it. So it was just like everything was going wrong for these bank robbers. Not that I'm feeling at all sympathetic for them, but everything was kind of like all these funny things were kind of going wrong. So Bob takes off with his bag, and as I described earlier, he starts getting in the dueling with A.R. Manning and gets shot in the elbow. Charlie Pitts goes out after him, and that leaves Frank James here. And Frank is angry. And Frank's not exactly a nice person to start with. Of all the gang members, I think he had the worst and surliest personality. Joseph Lee Haywood is starting to stand up. He's still alive. And Frank turns to him and shoots him in the head in cold blood and leaves. Now, Joseph Lee Haywood, saves the town's money. To this day, we don't know exactly his motivations. That money wouldn't have been insured. So had it been stolen, these people would have lost everything, the hopes and dreams of all these people who had saved the money. And he knew that the safe wasn't locked. So had he let them in, and he lost his life as a result. So he's considered a hero to this day in the city of Northfield for kind of saving the town, because they probably wouldn't have survived.
They would have gone bankrupt, I'm
right,
sure.
Exactly. They'd lost all their money. There's a monument to him out in our cemetery, and we celebrate him every year with the Joseph Lee Haywood Award, which is given out once a year to a good citizen of Northfield.
That's incredible.
But yeah, what he did that day was crazy. And the interesting thing is, about 3 or 4 days before the robbery, the president of Carleton, which was a new institution at the time, asked him if he would ever open the safe if bank robbers came to the bank, and he said no.
Wow.
Premonition, fun fact, right? So the bank robbers take off out to the south. They go through Dundas, which is a little town close to here. They have to get across the Canaan River. Again, that was originally their plan, to go out to the west. They get out, they head south towards Mankato through Millersburg. The largest posse ever assembled in the United States, of 1,000 people, goes after them.
Wow, because of this.
Because of this, and because they're so famous,
yeah.
right? And after 1 week, they're going through what was called the Big Woods at the time. It's not wooded around here now, right? All those woods have been cut down and made into farm fields, but it was very thick woods, and it's pouring down rain, so it is not pleasant for the posse, and it's not pleasant for the guys getting away. Now, Cole's been shot in the hip, Bob's got a smashed elbow, so they're not in good shape either.
Yeah.
The younger boys are particularly slowing things down. Frank and Jesse break off from them after a week. They're able to get down to southwestern Minnesota and leave the state and make it back to Missouri. The younger brothers, another week goes by, and they are caught by 7 people who are members of a posse down by Hanska's Slough, which is down by Medelia. There's a shootout there. Charlie Pitts is killed. Cole is hit 11 times. He lives.
Wow.
Jim is shot 5 times, lives. And Bob is shot once while he's surrendering, gets shot in the chest, lives. They're captured and taken to Faribault, which is the county seat. They are They are charged with 4 crimes: robbing the bank, the murder of Joseph Lee Haywood, the attempted murder of Alonzo Bunker, and the murder of Nicholas Gustafson. So Nicholas Gustafson was a citizen of Northfield, was a Swedish immigrant who was caught in the crossfire. He was shot in the head, and he died about 6 days later. We to this day don't really know who shot him, because it could have been friendly fire, but these guys get charged with the whole kit and caboodle. They plead guilty to avoid the death penalty, because we had the death penalty in Minnesota at that time. They are convicted, a life sentence to Stillwater Prison. After 25 years, they are paroled. Bob dies in prison. He never really recovers from the chest wound and dies of tuberculosis about 12 years in. After 25 years, they are allowed parole. So Cole and Jim leave prison. Jim dies a year later from suicide. Cole is eventually pardoned by the governor of Minnesota.
What?
And ends up going back down to Missouri and doing a Wild West tour with Frank James.
You gotta be kidding me.
And he writes a book, and he's all, woe is me, I regret my life of crime, and that kind of thing. He dies of old age in 1915, and Frank dies of old age in 1916.
Wow.
Now, Jesse had gone and started another bank robbing gang. They were never very successful, but he is shot about 6 years after this robbery by one of his gang members, who shoots him in the back for the reward.
That's the way it goes, huh?
That's the way it goes. You play with bad people, but that was the end of the Younger Gang. But really, James' Younger Gang never robbed another bank after today in Northfield.
Wow.
We defeated them, if you will. So.
That's so great that you've kept so much of the original.
Well, they found it over the years. It certainly was not here in the 70s. No, none of this was here.
Oh, I had kind of, for some reason, thought maybe they kept as much as they could.
They restored it all when they restored this museum.
That's
in the
incredible.
late 70s, and were able
That's
to
quite a
find it.
task.
And still to this day, they're getting something back. You know, when they find out somebody's got him. Henry Wheeler's. They just got his actual rifle that he shot with that was in somebody's collection over the years.
Yeah, and you have that on display here, right?
Yeah.
Wow, this is great. This is such a cool tour that you
free
give.
to just walk around and look at stuff. There's a lot more, information.
Where that line is, you can see J.S. Allen's signature. What a great tour they offer here. If you can get anywhere close to being here and make the special trip, this was incredible. To see the actual place and the objects. So we're actually going to walk behind the tellers. This is where Alonzo Bunker and Frank Wilcox would have been held by Bob Younger right here while this was all going on. And that's the door that Alonzo Bunker escapes from, or escapes through. So this is where all of that would have taken place. It's awesome that the Historical Society itself gives a tour. It was only $10 also. $10 donation, or they say what you can afford. So that is the very table that Joseph Lee Haywood would have been holding on to when he was shot. And there's the vault. There's the safe that they were trying to get. Only they had known that it was already open and there was a bullet hole in here from when they tried to wake up Joseph Lee Haywood at the time. Man, that is so crazy to see. To be able to go in here. Wow. So he would have stuck his arm out here to block the door, and Joseph Lee Haywood would have, this is the view they would have seen of the robbers jumping over right there to come back here. That's where Bob Younger would have held them hostage. So here's Cole Younger. He was one of the gang that day. Over here they have his shackles from that. So as soon as we walk in the museum, this whole wall is dedicated to the Haywoods. There's Joseph Lee Haywood up there. There's his grave that we will go out to. Now look at some of the things that are on display. They have one of the saddles from that day. And this is an image of what it would have looked like. The whole, while the bank was being robbed, there was a whole chaotic scene happening outside, because this is where A.R. Manning and J.S. Allen had been sitting, and that's where Wheeler would have shot from. So the Jesse James and his crew would have been down here. The two that came in would have been up here fighting, and the bank would have been getting robbed at that time. The man pictured here was Henry Wheeler. His father owned a drugstore across the street. And when J.S. Allen saw Clell close the door, he came up to see what was going on, and Clell pulled out a pistol on him. So they started to struggle, and J.S. Allen yelled out, "Get your guns, boys, they're robbing the bank." And Henry was across the street, and he yelled, "Robbery, robbery." So when the men actually left from robbing the bank, Bob Younger had a altercation with A.R. Manning out front, and it was Henry Wheeler that shot him in the elbow from across the street in the hotel. That's why that photo is there. And they have his gun that he shot Clell Miller with. And they actually have the percussion cap there. It says during the raid, Henry Wheeler used a similar cartridge to kill Clell Miller. After he dropped the third cartridge, the paper covering broke. That is the actual rifle, though, it says. And right over here, this was Clell Miller's gun they got from the family. And this was Henry Wheeler's pocket watch that was gifted to him by the people of this town. Now, this revolver was used by Charlie Pitts inside the bank robbery. This one over here was it's called a Moore revolver. It was Cole Younger's gun after he was captured. And the spurs were found on the street up here after the robbery. And then the gun, they said they also found on the street. One of the townspeople found it, kept it. Here's Bill Chadwell's spurs that he was wearing when he was killed here on Division Street by A.R. Manning. Taken off of his body as a souvenir. Now this gun here says that was A.R. Manning's gun that day, and that he killed Bob Younger's horse and Bill Chadwell with that gun. And this was the top gun says this was a shotgun that was similar to the one that the townspeople used to defend themselves. And a couple of the guys did end up with birdshot up around their face. So in the museum you can also see where all the displays are. They do recreations, I think, every year on the anniversary, a recreation of this happening. So you can watch a little bit of it in here. But yeah, this is a pretty cool display that they have. It's not huge, but it's got all the big artifacts you'd want to see. What were you reading about his wife over here?
Well, I was reading a little bit about Lizzie Mae Haywood, which was actually the daughter of the man who was basically
Joseph Lee Haywood's daughter.
Joseph
Okay.
Haywood. And they were saying that his heroic act literally hit from the banks of Canada all the way down through the United States. This was very big news. And as part of a thank you, because Haywood essentially left a widow and a young daughter, a bunch of the banks from all around the country donated, so that way they would be left with almost $13,000 to be left to a trust to take care of the family.
Yeah, and when we took the tour, she told us they had $15,000 in the bank here at the time of the robbery, which would have been roughly $250,000 at the time.
Exactly.
So that tells you what the people donated.
$250,000, absolutely. That was a lot of money.
Now let's go out and visit the grave that the town has. I guess the town is responsible for making this memorial to Joseph Lee Haywood, as should be. So right here you can see some of the original hitching posts from that day. And this would have been the entrance. These are the doors that this door right here on this side would have been open, and that's the one that he would have got off his horse to come close. It started this whole thing. Like I said, if you can come take this tour, I highly recommend it because, you know, this is a big tourist attraction for the town, and they don't glorify the actual robbery and everything. They glorify the heroism of the people involved, which I think is an amazing way to look at it. So this whole thing happened over here that we just showed you, and she was telling us that they were originally going to leave out the iron bridge. This was what she was talking about. That's the iron bridge. So the first cemetery I wanted to stop at today in town was Oak Lawn Cemetery. A few people involved in that day are actually buried here. So right over here, the first grave here in the cemetery that we wanted to share with you was Henry Wheeler. Henry Wheeler was the man who was home from leave from his school. They were on break. And he was sitting out in front of his father's pharmacy on a bench and saw the whole thing break out, and he's the one that went up to the window inside the boarding house and shot Bob in the elbow, and was a massive hero that day. Lived to be 76 years old, it says. Henry Nelson Wheeler died April 13th, 1930. If it would have been any other day, he probably wouldn't have even been there. Just happenstance. Hero by happenstance. Sorry, I saw Henry Nelson Wheeler on there, but when we saw the footstones, Henry Mason Wheeler. Here's the grave of James Strong, who was one of the founders of the college here in town, but also during that day was who took the body of Joseph Lee Haywood to his wife, to his family. And these are all in the same part of the cemetery. We're going to show you a new one here, but we just showed you two of them over here. So this is the grave of Ira Sumner. He actually was the photographer who took pictures of the dead bodies of Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell. So he ended up selling, you know, back in the day, people wanted proof that the people were dead, so they would sell those photos and publish them places. He made a lot of money off those photos that he took. Here's his footstone, Ira Sumner. He co-owned the photography studio here in town. Now, Joseph Lee Haywood is actually in Northfield Cemetery, so we're going to go over there now. Now we're over at Northfield Cemetery, where Joseph Lee Haywood is buried. So here we are. This is his headstone, this big one. And then, Katie, who do you think that one is?
I believe that might be his first wife, actually.
34 years. Joseph Lee Haywood, age 39. So he would have been the eldest one in the bank that day, and the one that was the acting cashier at the time. So he's the only one that they thought could get into the vault, but the safe was already unlocked. They just didn't know. Rest in peace, hero. Great to see that the town memorializes him every year, and still to this day is grateful. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's vlog. I think this is the best way we could end it. Have a great night from Northfield, Minnesota. Goodbye.